Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Financing Your WISP at the virtual WISP America show. My name is John Scrivener. I'm the Vice President of Broadband for Live Oak Bank, and I'll be your moderator today. Our presenters are Rob Bresnahan, who's a CPA with Fibersmith, Pierce Verchek, who's a VP of Broadband for Live Oak Bank, and Josh Luthman, who's CEO of
Imagine Networks.
My apologies, Josh.
No, you're good.
I've had a long history in the WISP industry. I was in 10 years in cable television prior to that. I formed a WISP in 1997 and helped with many others to form the WISP Trade Association, serving as the organization's founding president. And so it's an honor to be here as part of the first virtual trade show in WISP's history. We wish it was not under pandemic conditions, but we thank you for your support. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rob Bresnahan to bring his portion of the presentation. There will also be several focus points related to what we call the 5 C's of credit. And they're important to helping those of you in the WISP industry consider what you need to do if you're considering financing for your WISP operation or your FISP operation, which we know there are many of those in the industry who are doing fiber as well. So without further ado, Rob Bresnahan.
Thanks, John. Good to be here. Good to talk to everybody again. For those of you that know me, I've done this for a long time with WISP. I've done a lot of the financing sessions over the years. For the better part of the last 20 years, I've been a CPA, specializing in audit and tax, and consulting, regulatory, all the above with the telecommunications world. And I spend most of my time doing that. So I've done a lot of things, on the finance side, just for normal businesses would do. We do it for the telecom industry. And this session came up and we started talking about it. And every year you have to do some continuing education to keep your CPA license. So I was looking through trying to find some last minute stuff at the end of December. And I found one that said 5 C's of credit, and I'd never heard of it. And I was just kind of interested because I was going through a lot of loans, putting a lot of applications together, doing a lot of forecasting. And I was really intrigued by it. And truthfully, it was one of the best continuing education sessions I've had in the last 5 years. Very updated, very informative, and I thought it was really applicable to the industry. So I talked with John and Pierce, and thought what they thought, and we brought Josh on to kind of go through his process and everything. So the 5 C's of credit, we'll just kind of jump into it. It's a set of guidelines and standards used in the banking industry, kind of finance industry, kind of all the above. Just really good principles for how you handle things. Helps to determine the credit worthiness and loan eligibility, aids in understanding of the loan application process, and also assists in identifying what you need for the application. If you want to scroll back one, John. Perfect. The big thing is that this lets you in on how people analyze borrowing and how everybody should look at borrowing and how you should identify and kind of scrutinize your company. Put yourself under a microscope and really look at who you are, what your company does, and what you can show people from the inside looking out. So that's the big thing, identifying what is needed for an application and what your company looks like. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So 5 C's, we all have them in there. They're all in different orders. There's no standard order for anything, but it's collateral, capacity, capital, conditions, and character. You'll see this as 4 C's, and it's however you do it, but they're all really good principles. So I'm going to step through these one by one, give you the basic, and then we're going to jump to Pierce and get his opinion and viewpoint on a lot of these things that he's seen over the years. And then we'll kind of go from there, and then have Josh jump in with his story. Collateral is what can be used to guarantee repayment. I tell people that when you go in for a loan, you have to have something. You can't just say my business is great, give me a bunch of money. There's risk involved with any borrowing. So what can you use to guarantee the repayment to the borrower? Any asset that you can offer to secure that loan is your collateral. Business assets is identifiable assets, the value of your network. I really push this a lot with people, that if you're not capitalizing assets on your books, you're not really putting identifiable assets on your balance sheet and giving your network, the entire network cost that provides that service every day. You're not giving that a value, and you're not showing that there is an outside value to that, what it cost you to put it in. And then investments in other affiliates. If you have other companies, a lot of people have, kind of affiliate companies where you might have a managed services group that you have in a separate LLC. That can also be another way to secure your loan, have those assets or that company. So then we'll jump into capital. So capital is your personal investment in your company. What have you put in over the years? What are you putting in right now? What are you doing? Are you constantly putting money in? Is that something that they need to look at? Or what do you plan on doing in the future? Can you put that in the future? The ability to put capital in, kind of skin in the game is what you want. You want to show a lender, that you're willing to, that you take your business seriously. You're willing to put something in. If you're willing to put some real estate in, or any asset that can be converted to cash, you're willing to put that stuff into the business to keep it going, and that you're really into this. It's not just a side project. This is your business. You take pride in it, and you just move forward from there. So let's go to the next slide, John. So capacity and cash flows. Capacity, do you have the ability to take on more debt, or just your general ability to repay the loan? If you don't have any debt so far, then you're looking at, you're generating cash. Can you make this new payment? If you're taking on new debt, can you pay the old debt and the new debt? Okay. Now, it's availability of cash to pay down your debts, but look at it this way. It's new and old. New debts and old debts, but are you also creating income from new operations that are going to help with this new debt? That's the other thing that you really need to look at, because you're kind of looking in the future. Okay, if you get a loan and you're trying to get a loan for 5 years, the borrower wants to know, are you going to be able to repay it in the next 5 years? What are you going to do different that's going to increase your revenues to let you pay more debt down and have more cash to pay back my loan? So one of the big things that I tell everybody is financial statements are key. Balance sheet and income statement are, key. You need to have something internal outside of just a tax return. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but you want to have something that you can look at, something that you can show them, and something that you understand, that you can explain, not just what you print out of QuickBooks. Make sure it's something that makes sense to you. And then forecasting your financial statements. We did a session last week, but this is all going to be in cyberspace, so no time will be relevant. But we did one. If you have time, look at it. It was a really good one. It's budgeting and forecasting for telecom, and it gave some really good basics, a lot of hints and tips and tricks on how to look at things. But a forecast is pretty much, what is your business going to do under a certain scenario? So you take that scenario and you say, oh, I'm going to borrow money to buy equipment, upgrade my network, buy another company, and this is what's going to happen to everything, to cash, to debt, to revenues, to everything. So you look at every aspect of your business, what's going to happen because you're trying to get some debt. Let's go to the next slide. Conditions. This is an interesting one, especially if our time right now. Right now we're in the middle of the pandemic. Everything's shut down. The economy is adjusting. But it's the state of your business and your industry and the economy. That's why if you're dealing with a lender that understands the industry, then you've already got that covered. But that's a big one in my mind. Understanding that and educating who your lenders are. Also understanding what the economy and what the hard parts of your business are. What are the pain points? What are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis? And then it's the reason for the loan and how you will use the money. You need to explain to them what's going to happen. Why are you looking at this? Why do you need money? Is it because you need to upgrade your network so you can offer faster speeds and get $5 more per customer? That's a great way to put it. But if you just say, I want to grow bigger, well, you got to get a little more in depth with that. It kind of goes into a business plan type thing. So those are always good to have also. And I believe there's one more, John. Let's go to the next one. And then character. This is one that not a lot of people think about. Borrowers' business reputation. This is one thing that you look at. You think that you're taking the money out just for the company. Okay, so you look at the Better Business Bureau ratings done at Bradstreet, your local community, what they say about your company, and the industry reputation that you have maybe within WISP or FISPA or any of these big groups. But even though the loan is for your business, the lender needs to have faith in you. If you take anything out of my slides from here, that slide is what is key. Okay, you have to sell yourself as the business owner. Okay, and that's a big thing I've seen with a lot of different, potential lendings and trying to go out and get some money. You really got to sell yourself. The business is great, but it's you that they're investing in, who's leading it. And that goes down to, they need to know that the borrowers are honest and have integrity. That's a big thing. But you also need to be confident that they have the education, background, industry knowledge, industry experience required to successfully operate the business. So you need to express how long you've been doing this and why you're qualified to do it and why you're qualified to take your company into the next level. Other big thing is personal credit history does apply. Most of the time there's, personal guarantees that are related to this stuff. But the personal credit history does really, impact that. Everybody's, every person, every business has had their ups and downs, and everybody understands that. But if you do have something there, just kind of take it with a grain of salt and be upfront with it. Big thing is demonstrate responsibility and integrity of your actions. You want to show that you can repay this loan because they're taking a chance on you. So just prove to yourself that you're there, that you're good, and you're responsible enough to take it on. So then, John, one more slide. That's my thank you. That's my 2 cents on it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Our contact information is there. But we're hoping that this is a little bit of an eye opener, kind of what people look at and how you look at it. And Pierce will give you a little bit more. But thank you, John.
Thank you, Rob. And to let everyone know, at the very last slide, I've reinserted the contact details for each of our presenters and myself, so that you can make note of that if you didn't catch it at the beginning. So we will have that again. I would like to introduce now Pierce Verchek. Pierce holds a Bachelor of Science in Finance and Government from Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He is currently the VP of Broadband Lending on our team at Live Oak Bank. He works with me on that. We're based in Wilmington, North Carolina. Pierce is a member of, Pierce has a working knowledge and experience in specific lending products geared towards broadband providers. Prior to joining the broadband team at Live Oak Bank, Pierce held several roles across the bank, including business analyst group, credit underwriter for SBA and conventional loan products. His recent role with emerging markets team at Live Oak Bank, which is responsible for the research, identification, and the implementation of new vertical lending, has led us to where we are today. Pierce's work in bringing broadband to Live Oak Bank and working with me to do that has brought us back together, and he's bringing his expertise to bear in full force for broadband. And so without further ado, Pierce Verchek.
John, thanks for the kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel and this virtual conference at WISP America with Rob and Josh. I know we're all excited to get this out there and share with all the operators out there, so I appreciate it. Like Rob mentioned, this is a lot of my presentation is based on the 5 C's of credit, but maybe a little bit more from the lending side. and how maybe a bank or a lender would look at, this type of analysis. And so first and foremost, just want, from our end to emphasize that from the perspective of a lender, it's helpful when you, as an operator, are hoping to get approved for a loan for your independent broadband business, because at the core of this process is the analysis that you see. We're assessing credit, the capacity or cash flow of the business, the condition of the industry or the business, capital and collateral. And those are kind of the aspects that make up the entire analysis that we look for. And most lenders will look at these. They'll take some type of look at each of these 5 sections of this analysis and really evaluate the opportunity at hand. So we can get right into it. John, next slide, please. So first off, character. As Rob mentioned, and I will echo this, this is something that's extremely important to lenders. They need to know really who the money is going out the door to. Things like ownership experience plays a big role in understanding the borrower's ability to execute on that said business plan, or potential projections, whether you're expanding the business or maybe buying up a competitor. And qualities like honesty and integrity, they go a long way. Outside of that, looking at personal credit history, that's another big item. Things that really drive up a good credit score and personal responsible borrowing history. That's something that's a great mark for each and every loan applicant. Maybe a black mark would possibly be bankruptcy. That may be something where lenders shy away from. But having that personal credit knowledge allows for banks to assess the character of borrowers, and the last of which would be, a criminal record. If something has come up, to Rob's point earlier, if you're forthright and honest about it, most lenders can get around that. But again, having that information all kind of adds up into what is deemed the character of the individual borrower and applicant. Next slide, please. This slide, all about cash flow and the capacity of the business to borrow. The typical questions that come up with lenders would be, can the business support debt obligations? But also, can they cover current operating expenses and salaries comfortable? Because what we want to make sure as a lender is, one, that businesses can pay debts back. However, the second is not putting the individuals who work for the company or own the company in an adverse situation. We don't want to cause undue stress by giving a loan to a business that may not be able to pay it back, because there's a difference between putting stress on the business, but also putting stress on employees. We're seeing it a lot currently in this pandemic, where many employees are feeling the stress now. They've either been laid off or let go, not necessarily in this industry. But we don't want to put folks in that type of situation. We want to partner with businesses in hopes that the capital that's provided is provided in a way that's responsible and prudent. Next slide, please. The other aspect of the condition, from a lender standpoint, this is really important in understanding not only from a macro level how the U.S. economy is performing, but really understanding the business. And at many institutions, they may ask specific questions around what's the typical payroll expense, or what's the typical net profit margin. But really taking the time to partner with your bank and making them understand is something that's going to help that bank get to a yes. If the bank better understands what the state of your business is and the state of your industry, then that's something that can really drive that overall decision to a yes much quicker than some of the other aspects of this analysis. And lastly, I know Rob briefly mentioned it, but how does debt financing change the condition? Is it something where you've historically, financed your growth through cash flow, and now you have the opportunity to obtain capital that's from a bank lending partner, and you're able to rapidly deploy that capital to more quickly and expediently grow, expand your network, maybe provide more bandwidth availability to your existing customers and subscribers? Those are all conditions of the business that could change as a result of providing debt financing. Next slide, please. Capital, this all relates to skin in the game. Rob mentioned it, and this is something from a lending perspective. This is something we look for all the way, because at the end of the day, we love to partner with borrowers, and it's exactly that, a partnership. If folks are asking banks to take on all the risk, that's something that many lenders may shy away from. At the end of the day, the bank is wanting to make an investment in you and your business in that partnership, and potentially be, rewarded for that. But we are, the lenders are willing to extend financing, extend capital in a responsible way. And so if we can share in that risk and partner with operators in the broadband business, then that's something that, again, we love to do. But understanding that risk is something that's extremely important for banks. And then lastly, collateral. Any hard asset, fixed asset is something that banks typically use from a conventional lending standpoint. But the other aspect to think about is the value of your business, the value of the recurring cash flow that's generated from your subscriber base. That is value. If you were to go and try and sell that, there are many folks who can properly value that and, offer up what would be a great goodwill value for your business. So understanding every collateral aspect of your business, whether it's tangible or intangible, is extremely important. And having a lender that understands that and gets that is something that's very important as well. And so each lender will definitely have a different take on what significance they put on each aspect. But again, going back to the skin in the game or capital, the partnership aspect is very important. So having an open line of communication with your bank partner is, again, extremely important. And so just as a recap, a quick recap, running back down the list, character. I'm a big sports fan, and so one of the quotes that stood out in my mind was from John Wooden, and he said, "The ability, as may get you to the top, but it really takes character to keep you there." And so that speaks again to the ownership criteria that you have and making sure that you're exhibiting responsible borrowing. Next up, the capacity or cash flow, making sure from a historical and or projection basis that you understand what's leaving the company, what's coming in, and is there cash flow left over to support additional growth. Condition, this really again talks about the business and the macroeconomic condition of how you're operating. Is the industry, is the business, or is the overall state of the United States economy, are those all favorable conditions that you're operating in? Capital, again, the whole idea behind this is skin in the game. Can we all share in the risk and share in the reward of what would be a bank and independent broadband provider partnership? And then lastly, collateral. Do you understand, and are banks understanding of the collateral that's being offered? Is it just fixed and tangible assets like shown on the slides, or is it intangible like the goodwill and the value that you've built over time as a great broadband provider in your area and local market, and the value that's tied to that subscriber base? And so this really concludes my part of the presentation. I hope you took away a little something that may be from the lens of the lender outside of what Rob was able to show. But looking forward to hearing as well from an operator's point of view in our next presentation from Josh. But again, any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you again.
Pierce, thank you so much for that eloquent job of presenting what could be a difficult topic for an operator. Most operators, even myself included, I was very technically oriented in operations and working my WISP operation when I started mine. I did not know a lot about finance, and so we've hit on the 5 C's of finance through Rob, who does for a living and has for over 20 years. He's worked with telecommunications, broadband companies, fiber and wireless, to help them make sure that their finances were being represented accurately and properly to help them forecast and finance the future growth of their companies. Pierce has worked for many, many years in helping not only broadband companies, but several other industries and their people to put together financing packages to help them grow their companies. In my own business, I did not know that how many options were available, how many tools in the toolbox there were in finance that could have helped me to grow my business. And I'm going to guess that a lot of you out there are probably in that 750 to maybe 1,200 customer range. And at that range, you can grow that business yourself. You can manage it yourself. You might even take on a lot of the daily workload yourself. But beyond that, to grow beyond that level or to move into things like fiber, maybe take on licensed frequencies and carrier, higher end cellular carrier grade type gear on your network. If you're going to do those things, you're probably not going to do it organically. But the one thing that you have when you develop that, outside of building on your character and the other C's out there, is that you have capital in that network that you've built. There's value there. And with that being said, I'd like to move on to an operator that's working today in the fixed wireless broadband space and in fiber optics. His name is Josh Luthman with Imagine Networks, that I forgot to say earlier. And Josh, I've never seen this rainbow colored hard hat that you described in your introduction to us. But I look forward to seeing a picture of that. Did you bring it with you to show everybody in our virtual session? Do you have your hard hat?
No, I didn't. I had to leave it at home. I had to rush in and get into the office and get stuff started before I could show up here.
I expect that you will maybe on the WISP group page. Maybe you could give us all a picture of that. I think that would be in order. But he included that in his introduction, so I thought I'd bring it up. Josh is a very hardworking, driven broadband operator. I'm glad to know him. I know that he does a lot of his own climbing, installs, operations, tech support, and financials. And Josh is going to tell us a little bit today about the decision on moving toward financing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Josh.
All right. Okay, so as was said, my name is Josh Luthman, Imagine Networks. I'm an owner-operator in Southwest Ohio, based in Troy, just a little bit north of Dayton. We started our business in 2006 and really focused on WISP and so on and so forth in 2008. So what Rob and Pierce are really talking about is a lot of, I don't necessarily say theory, but a lot of the mindset and a lot of stuff behind the scenes. What I'm going to talk a lot about is the actual practice, what you've actually seen, what you see on a day-to-day basis and stuff like that. So like I said, we started in 2006, didn't have any money. I just graduated school. I'm not a big fan of college, and I went to college and I became even less fan of a college. It was just you seemed like to throw a lot of money at it, and I was lucky enough to get a grant, so I didn't even pay for it, if that tells you anything. So I'm basically starting with a fresh slate. No assets, no money, no capital, no nothing. I mean, I'm just a kid with a credit card that has a $500 limit. I was lucky enough to be able to live at home to not have those massive expenses of, mortgage or rent and all this other stuff for the first couple of years. So having that cash to not have to pull out of the business, because there really was no paycheck or anything like that for years. Just something to start the business with all that. So as far as, when we first started in 2006, just started doing IT stuff. How it is if you're the technical kid, all the grandparents and family and friends and all that other stuff want you to fix their computers and whatever. So that's kind of what I started. Had a couple of customers that were just residential. They just needed their Windows computer fixed. And there were other things where there's, a doctor's office that's got this fancy high-end, couple of machines where it was bare metal back in the day, and you had a RAID controller and a NAS and all this other stuff, and he had to make sure that was up and running so he could do his business. Didn't have his own IT department, so we were the IT department for his business. We did IT stuff, we did phone stuff and all that, and then once we were doing VoIP, we wanted to work with an internet company. We did work with the cable company back before they were doing VoIP, and we would do our VoIP product. They would do their internet product. It was a really good combination. And of course, a little bit later, they realized that we were making money at it, so they wanted to make money at it. So we got forced out of that. Did it for business, and we got forced out of that, or we knew we were going to get forced out of it. So we were looking for an ISP to do business with. Cable company obviously was come and gone. Phone company just didn't make sense. There's no way in the world they would entertain working with us because we're direct competition. So we found out about this weird thing called fixed wireless broadband, or whatever it was called back in the day, town next north. So spoke with them and ended up just buying that business, and tried to work together. Long story short, that disappeared, and we sold all the VoIP stuff, and now we're focusing on 100% in the fixed wireless broadband market now. If we can go to the next slide. So now that we're doing just WISP stuff, I mean, we spent a couple of years testing the water, seeing what products work, and so on and so forth. Now we've decided we're going to do WISP. So most of our customers are pretty much stuck between us and dial-up. With it being the rural market, you've got advantages and disadvantages. So yes, we can get a customer. Once we get a customer, it's great, but of course it's hard to get those customers because there's a reason nobody else has 3 or 4 options for internet out there already. We've got trees and vegetation, and the customer doesn't want the dish installed in their house, kind of a thing, and we got hills and whatever all else. And then of course you've got the costs and so on and so forth of putting your equipment up on the tower before you even get a dime from the customer themselves. So over the years, we've at this point we're about 25 towers, bigger Grand Legs, stuff like that, 100 to 300 feet, kind of a range. Now, once we've spent the last about 9 years really pushing on the WISP things, now we've got a really nice set of income. Billing system takes care of things. There's technicians that go out there and do most of the day-to-day operations and just keep things floating around. So you could see that my last slide here is the most important thing. Bills are paid, everybody's happy. Everybody's got paycheck, all that other stuff, which years ago obviously was kind of an issue. And the biggest thing here is I can afford Taco Bell anytime I want it. That to me was like my goal when I was first starting the business. Just to be able to go out and not have to worry about my last $3 or $4 and now I'm bankrupt, or I have to worry about late fees or my own overdraft fees and stuff like that. I didn't do a lot of this stuff in the first several years, probably because of a lot of the same reasons that what John had mentioned. I didn't know it was available to me. We did try to work with a couple of banks here and there, but that was really just a waste of time. Working with Chase Bank and all the banks that everybody knows, they don't really either know or care, whatever it is. It just didn't work out. So when we were first starting financing, our biggest thing was leasing. There's several WISPA members that you can talk to that can do this. My suggestion is probably just look through the list of members, find a distributor and see what the distributor suggests. Get 2 or 3 different quotes at the very least. More quotes is not going to hurt you by any means. But once you've got all that stuff up on the tower and you've got a bunch of CPEs to install, if a customer's knocking at your door, you don't want to sit there and say, well, I can't install you today because I don't have equipment. So what I would recommend is leasing that equipment. And you can do this with APs or routers, whatever you want to do. If you don't have that product on the shelf, on your shelf, then you can't deploy it. So if you bundle up a whole bunch of different products and stuff and you lease it out, you can see the math there. So basically what it says is that you're going to get all this equipment, you're going to finance it over the course of 12, 24, 36 months, whatever's comfortable with. Shorter is better in the sense that you're not going to pay as much in quote interest, which I know that from a CPA term or whatever you want to call it, it's not technically interest, it's financing charges and whatever all else. But the longer you extend it out, the more you're going to pay in financing charges. So yes, you want to finance, but you don't want to overextend yourself. And by financing this, you still have your cash flow. You still have most of your cash flow. And as you install the first couple of those CPEs and you get those customers online, that cash that's bringing in goes towards that bill. And then all the other CPEs that you go out there and deploy, now that's the income that goes towards the business. And you could start up another lease, or you could take some out for yourself, or whatever you want to do. Another key point that I don't know how true it is anymore, but I definitely want to make sure it's said. This was definitely true in the $300, $400, $500 CPE range. But if you buy things in bulk, if you end up getting, we'll say 100 CPEs or whatever it is, if you're buying so much stuff all at once, a lot of times the cost per item drops to the point where it'll actually negate your cost of finance charges. So yeah, you're still going to pay it out over 24 months, but where the finance charges exist, it could be roughly the same or maybe even better than the cost of the equipment if you just buy it onesie twosie here and there. And of course there's shipping involved and managing it, making sure you have enough, and so on and so forth. So being able to use somebody else's money to grow your business is exactly why financing exists and why banks exist. Can we go to the next slide? So at this point, this is our experience. So now we've figured out we can use leasing, we can finance a little bit here and there. Leasing, by the way, is reasonably easy to get. 100% of the assets and all that become an asset as part of that lease. So if you don't pay it back, they take the equipment back, and realistically that shouldn't happen. But as long as you're reasonable, responsible about it, then you should be okay. But now, once you get to the point where you're self-funding and you have so much revenue that you don't really need to sit there and finance and take out small loans to grow all this, my experience is my first contact was with a local credit union. So like I said, in the past, I'd worked with banks and whatever else in the area. And I worked with my local credit union for years, and they didn't really do a whole lot for us up until the point where it was like, we don't really need money, but maybe it could be something. I just kept bugging their ear, maybe every couple of years or something. And finally they got back to me and said, hey, we got a product here that you might actually be interested in. And they gave us a line of credit where we could just, basically, if we really wanted to, we could go in, grab all that cash and, buy something, buy a new trailer, buy a new truck, or, whatever you wanted to do. But having that cash on hand was really nice to keep away from the cash flow on the day-to-day end of things. So now once we have this line of credit, it just grew and grew over a couple of years. And now the WISP was, even bigger than it was, a few years ago. Now we're looking at really, really big things, and that's kind of where we turned to fiber. The last couple of years, the WISP shows have shown a lot of stuff about fiber. And I mean, the big key things is that it is seriously capital intensive. You're going to need a ton of money up front, even if you've got really good employees, even if you've got a bunch of trucks and all this stuff sitting around. But you are going to need, some sort of capital up front to get started with. Can we go to the next slide for fiber? So this was just my experience with the Fiberhood story. So like I said, it's very capital intensive up front. WISP, you can buy an AP and a couple of CPEs here and there, but with the fiber end of things, you're gonna have to buy your FDH at the head end. You have to buy your cabinets. You have to bury all this stuff around the entire neighborhood. We're just starting with one neighborhood at this point in time, and it's going very well. But obviously, once again, capital intensive, so you have to be able to not overextend yourself and still be able to make those payments back. So I first started looking at doing fiber ourselves back in April in the Cincinnati show, March, I guess, 2019. I was talking to a handful of people and talked to some suppliers and, talked to this, that, and next thing. And I started getting everything together. And then we went back to the credit union and said, I'm going to need a bunch more money this time. And long story short, their perspective was that fiber is not a good investment. That's simply a credit union mistake. That's a local bank issue. Obviously, that's not the case. I'm working with Live Oak Bank, and obviously, I got the financing and everything. So maybe there's another bank out there that does it. I don't know. This is just my experience. The local banks seem to be ridiculous, and Live Oak Bank just got it done. That's as much as I can really get into that topic. So there's a Facebook group called WISPs Turning into Fiber to the Home ISPs or something like that. If you look through all that stuff, you will find so much information. It's all free. It's all right there. Just read through it. I mean, just take a couple hours every day and just see what you can get out of it. Just gobble that stuff up. And I'm sure everybody else is going to agree with me here when I say this, but you can ask pretty much anybody in this community questions. I don't think anybody's going to say otherwise. So now once we got to the point where we needed financing, I mean, I've got a drill operator showing up, I've got equipment showing up, and I've got, you know, all these semi trucks full of stuff just dropping all these pallets and everything. I needed to get money. So I spoke with John Scrivener, Live Oak Bank, like I said. And I think he said this yesterday. His personal record, and maybe it's Live Oak Bank record, we got from the very beginning of our conversation to closing was 50 days. I'm going to safely assume John's going to say that that's an exception to the rule. It should not be, 50 days. It's probably going to be a little bit longer, maybe not too much longer, but 2 months is not something that most WISPs plan out that far ahead. I think most WISPs are just, here's a problem up front. Here, I got to get this done. Got to get this AP swapped. Got to get this backhaul upgraded. We're not used to waiting 60 days for financing and then 90 days for product. And this is just a long, laborious process. So once we're approved, once we've got all the paperwork done and whatever all else, now we can finally get started moving. So the drill operator showed up beginning of December. He went through and did all of his stuff. And we're hooking up customers. Just got off the phone with one, and it may or may not be slower, it may not be higher, but it's standard ISP things apply. Don't overprice it, offer a good product, and so on and so forth. The biggest thing between fiber stuff and WISP stuff is once you put that stuff in the ground, once you put fiber in the ground, you're not going to have to replace it. Worst case scenario, in many, many years down the road, you replace the stuff on either end, but that's a one-day job. I mean, there's so much capacity and so much good stuff about it that it's great. But once again, you really have to make sure that your financing is in order. There's a lot of things that you guys were saying as far as the 5 C's, and this kind of plays into one of those. My advice, before you get started with any of this stuff, is have a lot of your ducks in a row and everything ready before you talk to any bank. That's going to be obviously the things on the list. A good attorney and a good accountant, best bit of advice I've ever gotten. Have good insurance. I've never done a claim to this point, so I don't really have any experience. I went with Unitel because that's what everybody in the WISP market said is good. Nobody's got any complaints about them. Great. So I signed up for it, and we'll just see how that one goes. Having a good P&L and balance sheet is definitely going to be critical. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the same story where your books look one way and the bank says no, we can't do anything, and then you shuffle some numbers around, your CPA makes your books a little bit better, and then you go to that same banker and show them the same information, but those numbers are shuffled around a little bit, and they go, well, here's your money. It makes no sense to me. I'm by no means a CPA, but I mean, it's just kind of the nature of how things are. Having your tax returns ready, this is something that you should be saving anyways. I just save it in a nice little folder on my computer so I can go through all of them for the last 14 years now. Having good personal credit obviously is going to be something that everybody's going to want to look out for. The fact that it was mentioned that you can have a bankruptcy on file and then still ask for money, that kind of blows my mind. I never really expected that, but I'm also not the one handing out money, so I don't know. So once you have all of this stuff in order, once your bank statements look a particular way and says, yeah, I could easily spend, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 a month on a new loan to build up this new business, so this new leg, that's one thing. But being able to prove it according to your paperwork is a totally other. I did have a huge cheating step on my side. There's a guy that's big executive, and there's an organization in this area called SCORE. Basically, executive retirees just help small businesses. Doesn't cost anything. How we found him, honestly, it's been so long I can't really say, but he did a lot of this stuff for us in advance years and years ago. So working with Live Oak Bank was really about as painless as I could possibly imagine for what I was asking of them. So having all that stuff prepared is certainly great. I'd be more than happy to share my templates and what I have. Obviously not the exact numbers, but just the specific things, what I had to prepare. It's pretty easy. But at the same time, if you just call up, whatever bank and they ask for stuff, you're just gonna have to work through it. And if you don't have it already, it may or may not be a bear, but you're gonna have to get it done sooner or later. Certainly if you want to finance big stuff, but I would also recommend it, for various reasons. Next slide. So to summarize, that we were planning on doing this live, but obviously that's kind of difficult. So now we're just doing a recorded presentation, but once again, feel free to ask questions, email me, or, find me on Facebook, whatever, shoot me a message, just feel free to ask, and I'm sure anybody else is going to feel the same way. And I'm not going to ask anybody this question, but, obviously I would like to hear the community's input on that if I could. Maybe it starts a little bit of discussion. So yeah, that's basically my story. That's what I actually went through in practice. It sounds a little bit more daunting than what it really is, but I mean, there's maybe a couple hours worth of work over a couple of weeks, for the paperwork. But it really was no big deal. I'd say most of it was spent on the phone, just talking and just understanding what they were looking for, and they moved through all the paperwork on their end and got approved, and that was that. We went from the end of September on the financing end of things, got an approval letter, I think is the word, when we were at Vegas, and then, which is like 2 or 3 weeks later, and then a couple of weeks after that, had access to the capital, started paying vendors off, and there you go. We'll see how it pans out, but at this point in time, it's certainly looking very, very promising.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you so much for that thorough overview of your experiences with finance for your broadband company, and it looks like that you've used several of the tools in the toolbox over the years, and I was glad to be part of it with you and work with you, and I look forward, hopefully, to doing more with you down the road with all you're doing. Moving into fiber is something that we see a lot of WISP operators doing. It is capital intensive, and but I'm very happy that you made the leap. That's not an easy step to take. I will add one more C that may actually fall under something that's been illustrated in our C's of credit. But I'd like to talk about communication a little bit. And what I've seen in my experience, I've been on both sides of the fence here related to broadband financing. And one thing that I see frequently are people that are either really good at communicating what it is they want to do and the history of their company and the future looking financial picture and the projects that they want to do, and some that are really, really bad at it. And I can tell you that communication is pretty important. So even though it may not be one of the traditional C's of credit, or it may fall under one of the categories and I'm just overlooking it, but I think that communication really helps. I think that if you prepare yourself, as Josh stressed in his presentation, and you work with CPAs out there like Rob and talk to bankers like Pierce or myself, then I think you'll do a lot better job if you're prepared, and you do a lot better job at speaking. I hope you do a better job at speaking than I did starting this session. I don't know why I was tripping over my tongue, but I feel like I kind of pulled it together at the end here with you guys. I sure appreciate you being part of our first WISPA America virtual trade show. And I hope it's a big success for WISPA. It was tough on them to not have us all go to that show after all the work that they put into it. And I will just add this, that I hope that everyone tries to step up and do a little bit for WISPA. They do a lot for us. And they took it on the chin, and they took it in their wallet pretty hard, I'm sure, when the WISP America show did not happen. So I hope you all will consider that in maybe being a little more open and free about paying for things that are asked from WISPA. They work very hard for us, all of us, and they're all appreciated. But right now, I want to say thank you to Rob, Pierce, and Josh. I will ask a couple of questions of them if I can think of something off the top of my head here.
Oh,
Um,
I actually have a couple of questions. I mean, especially, once you're talking about communicate here. So, um, at the beginning of this, we wanted to come up with at least one question for everybody else, just to kind of do a little bit of Q&A, I guess. But so, Pierce, I have a big question for you. So we talk about you'd mentioned bankruptcy, right? So, the fact that bankruptcy still lets you, continue down that road is kind of mind blowing to me. But I think about the biggest question I would have is at what point in time would you bring up these, bad things? You got a bad credit card debt, bad medical debt, bankruptcy, whatever, personal or business, whatever it is. I mean, this is something that you should open with. Obviously, probably not at the very end, right before closing, and that kind of stuff. I mean, what's an appropriate time to mention something like that?
Yeah, great question, Josh. Every bank has a different process. Typically, in my experience, how we've gone about that question is, because it's a tough, whether it's with the personal bankruptcy issue or a business bankruptcy, that's always a tough time in someone's life. And so, from our standpoint, we typically ask the question in the first conversation with a borrower because that is going to be the biggest hurdle that most lenders and borrowers have in trying to form a working relationship. So that's typically addressed in the first conversation. And if there are extenuating circumstances that maybe would have led to that event, there may be some flexibility there. But typically, it is asked on the first conversation because most lenders will have some sort of hard stop for that. But again, every lender has their own process, and so some may listen to the story, and some this may be a hard stop. So it varies from bank to bank, but typically we like to bring it up in the first conversation.
Okay, so if like if the bank doesn't ask, it's probably something that you should kind of make sure it's mentioned in the very towards the beginning, if not the very beginning, before wasting everybody's time.
Yeah, it would be our recommendation that the earlier the bank knows, the better, because that also adds to the whole character aspect of this. Where if you're forthright and honest about it, then that may be shown in a better light than trying to hide it until closing.
And I should
I would-
also probably specify that I didn't have any bankruptcies and stuff, so that's why I kind of asked the question. It's just kind of blown my mind.
I have a
Understand.
I have a question for you, Josh. This is John.
Mhm.
But I'd like to know. I'd like to know. I know that this pandemic, COVID-19, it's had a dramatic, terrible effect on many businesses, and it's had like a surprising effect, I think, for a lot of broadband companies, in that so many people are now working remotely.
Hmm.
Their kids are at home doing their schoolwork, and people are doing video conferencing and watching more streaming television than they ever have. So, what have you seen? What has the effects of this pandemic situation been to you, since you're an active broadband provider? And do you have any advice to share to other broadband companies that are facing the same things now that you are?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if I had known this was coming, I would have probably upgraded a handful of backhauls weeks ago or months ago. Um, so, I mean, I've always been one of those like super preparer kind of people. I have two 1 gig circuits, and I don't think we would even hit, I mean, maybe a gig between the two. So I've got double the backhaul capacity than what I need. The I'm sorry, uplink that I need for the backbones and stuff, that's something that I have a little bit of overhead, but definitely like to have a little bit more. If I've got, you know, if I've got a bill, or if I've got, say, $1,000 in my bank account, I would only spend like 15 of it. I like having all that stuff. I'd rather have more than enough than not need it. So in the last couple of weeks, obviously, everybody's probably aware, usage is crazy. The whole uploading video thing with webcams and conferences and stuff is definitely very interesting. But the usage in the grand scheme of things, I would say, our peak time is usually always in the evening. It's just kind of a residential thing, right? Well, now our peak time is from about 7 a.m. until about midnight. There is no growth over the course of the day. It's just everybody wakes up. Kids are already at school, at home, kind of a thing. They start all that stuff up at 7:15. We've had more installs in the last probably 2 weeks than we've had in the last 4, 6, 8 weeks. I had a customer that first called us in 2012, and he needed hooked up today, last Wednesday, the Wednesday before it was. We had a stay-at-home order that began last Sunday night, and ever since then, nobody can go out and do whatever it is they want to do. So all they're doing is stuck at home. So they're all increasing their plans, getting more usage, watching more TV. They're also working, doing school, and watching TV all at the same time, as opposed to maybe one or the other, or maybe even just two. Certainly as far as upgrades and new installs and all that stuff, business-wise, things are honestly pretty good. That's not a very good thing in the grand scheme of things, but as far as Imagine Networks is concerned, finances and all that, it's been pretty fortunate, I guess, is probably not the best word for it, but good financially at the very least.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Josh.
Mhm.
Rob Bresnahan has been a valuable resource to many of you guys out there. I know a lot of you know Rob. And if you don't, you should get to know him. He can help you with a lot of things regarding your finances. And he always has been a big help. And I just wanted to say that to Rob's benefit, because he deserves it. He helps a lot of guys. And so you get a chance to talk to Rob, I think it'll be good for you. And Rob, when you work with broadband companies, what are some of the mistakes that you see that are most common that they make regarding their finances that you end up having to work with them a lot on? What are some of the mistakes that you see?
Well, thanks for the kind words, John. Biggest things that I see are people treating their books like it's a tax return, expensing everything that you have just to save on taxes. The biggest thing to remember is that you have 2 sets of books, and it's not illegal. Okay, there's a set of books that you get into the format that banks and lenders and everybody else can look at, and that's what you say about your company, how you want to value your network. And then you can convert that every year into a tax return to save money. That's the biggest thing. I'll deal with companies that have been in business for 20 years and they have $10,000 of assets on their books, and that's one vehicle. That's it. But they have 3,000 customers, are generating $4 million in revenue a year, but they have no value of a network on their books. And that's something that I'm not a huge fan of. You can make differences if you know somebody that knows the industry and the ins and outs of all these things. I would rather have this huge value of my network to kind of help, show, okay, I spent $4 million putting this network together that's generating $4 million a year. It helps to solidify your financial statements. I really, I'm a big advocate for that. The other thing is you can capitalize your CPE cost. Each of those CPEs, even though they're anywhere from $100 to $500, you can capitalize those costs. You can also capitalize the installation costs on those. And that helps build your balance sheet up. There's a lot of things, and at the same time, when it builds your balance sheet up, it actually makes your earnings better because you're not expensing everything. First off, you're spreading it out over the life of the asset. So those are the 2 big things. There's a lot of other little tweaks that I do with companies, but working through that process, starting working with a company that's 1,000 lines to 15,000 lines, and I've done that in the last 6 months, but it's the same process no matter what size people are. Those are my biggest things. And I've actually got a couple questions for these other guys. Josh, I love your story. You've done pretty much the whole gambit that I've been preaching to people about for years. You've gone from the capital lease to a line of credit with a local bank, and then gone to a larger regional national bank. All things considered, you were in different stages of your life when you did each of those 3. Which one do you think was the hardest, was the toughest, just for you personally?
I would have to say probably middle of the road, the line of credit. Yeah, I would also say it was probably the easiest thing because it was one of those situations where I didn't really need money, and they were just like, "Hey, here's money." I was like, "Okay." I mean, it's nice to have access to that cash, but at the same time, this also kind of feels like a little bit of a liability, maybe. So, I mean, doing the financing is just real clear cut and dry. You know, it's going to be over in 12, 24, 36 months. I mean, it's like a car payment. It's no big deal. Um, but taking that first jump into having access to that kind of money was a little bit scary and definitely unfamiliar. I mean, you know, my mom worked at a grocery store. My dad just runs computers at a school. Um, didn't really have any banking experience. Didn't really have any business experience, and all of this stuff was all first time for me. So that's probably why I would say that's the scariest. But with a quick follow up of fiber is capital expensive, that is scary because I mean, you obviously have to be able to pay it back. But what if those customers don't sign up? What if for some reason you found the one neighborhood that loves the cable company and doesn't want to switch? Now you've got this huge loan and you've got no customers to pay it back. Now, obviously, the bank is going to loan you money unless you can pay it back, regardless of whether those customers sign up or not. But um, you know, both are definitely scary. But me personally, definitely middle of the road. Just getting into that first world of you know banking and everything. You know, Scrivener is certainly a great guy to work with, but it's just a lot of money, and no matter how you look at it, it's scary when you have that much at risk.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you. It's every stage is different. The one thing I will add on to that, and you'll probably agree with this, Josh, is whoever your lender is, I've seen it over the years with a lot of different companies, have a good working relationship with your lender. You know,
Oh yeah,
the biggest thing is if times come up and they're tough, call your lender and say, "Hey, I'm trying. I need like 6 months and I'm going to get out of this." You know, I've heard of people, could I go down to just interest only for 6 months? Could I, you know, they will work with you if you're upfront with them. It shows a
yep,
lot about that character principle we talked about. You know, wouldn't you agree, Josh, being open and honest?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we do the same thing for our customers, and I think it works this way all the way up the chain.
Yeah.
Well, Pierce, I would be doing Pierce a disservice if I didn't thank him for how much he does as well. The things that Pierce does the best are usually behind the scenes. They usually involve things that most of us don't have to think about on a level that we don't have to think about. I'm very fortunate to have to be able to work with someone with Pierce Verchek's skill sets and experience and vast knowledge. And I just wanted to thank you for that, Pierce. I could not be happier, and nor could I find anyone that I could pick to be a better help to work with me alongside me in what we do together. So I want to thank you for that publicly here on this. And also, I have a question for you. The question has to do, I want to throw you a little bit of a curveball, but not too much of one, I don't think. You've worked in several different small business industries. You've helped develop lending products to different small business industries. And I'm going to guess that you've probably seen some common themes develop around ways that all small business can benefit with financing and maybe some of the barriers that they face that are common. And I think it might be interesting to hear about that across all small business, the things that stand in the way and the things that can help them. What have you seen, Pierce?
Well, John, appreciate the kind words. And in trying to answer that to the best of my ability, I would say that, you know, a lot of small businesses, they don't realize the value that they indeed have built up over the years. I mean, there's a lot of sweat equity and time and energy that's being spent. And to Rob's point, if you're able to partner with with a CPA, with a professional who's able to demonstrate that to your partners, that's an extremely valuable resource. In addition to that, you know, understanding the opportunity cost of financing is important as well, because it is scary, and we try especially at our bank, to have that conversation and get down to the level that each operator is at, with helping try and mitigate the risk and minimize that worry. Because yes, it is a worry to take out, a loan for whether it's acquiring a competitor, buying your first office building, financing your expansion plan in whatever industry you operate in. But if you were previously doing that out of cash flow, how long would that process take if you never were to take on a loan? And balancing the pros and cons of those situations is really hard for small business owners, because they have to run their day-to-day business. They have to take care of their employees. They have to take care of their families. So helping try and describe that process to whether it's, a broadband provider, whether it's a chicken farmer, a self-storage operator, it really is something that has always been a challenge in small business. But in that challenge lies the biggest opportunity, where if there are banks that are willing to partner with you and give you the funding you need up front to be able to grow and expand in a responsible way, the hope is that you take advantage of that capital that's available to you to get to that next stepping stone quicker, faster, and more efficient. So I think, overall, that's probably the biggest takeaway from my end.
Well, thank you for that, Pierce. That's sage advice, as always. And believe it or not, Pierce talks that way, that eloquently, even when no one's around. You have a good way of delivering what you have to say, Pierce. You always do a good job there. I have one more C that I'd like to share, since I guess I've made a game of this now, and we're talking about the different C's of credit. I have one that I think is still worthy of discussing that wasn't on the list. It probably plays into character, but it's confidence. And I think that it's, one that should not be egotistical. That's overconfidence. But you also don't need to be talking to your banker as if you're apologizing for asking for money. You should have a level of confidence about what it is that you do, that what you've done, the project that you're looking to build and expand into. And if you don't, then maybe you need to work a little more on that, on what you're going to propose. And once you get to the point where you feel like you have a confidence about it, that you can talk openly and eloquently about what it is that you want to do, how much money you want, and how you're going to put it to work, under what timelines. When you do those things, then a banker feels a lot better about partnering with you to share that risk. So have a little confidence, not too much, but enough. And I want to thank every one of you guys for being part of this. Rob, Pierce, Josh, Sienna, who we've not heard from, who is a member of our WISP employees that helped put together this today. Thank you, Sienna. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes at WISPA for everything that you guys do for us. And for all of you that have come and listened and been part of our virtual WISP America show, we thank you all, and we wish you all a good day.